3.5.48, Srimad Bhagavatam. Tate vayam loka sasrikshayadya Tvayanushrishtas tribir atma bhisma Sarve viyuktas vaviharatantram Na saknumastat patihartavete Tate vayam loka sasrikshayadya Tvayanuyas tribir atma bhisma Sarve viyuktas vaviharatantram Nashaknumastat pratihartavete Tate vayam loka sasrikshayadya Tvayanushrishtas tribir atma bhisma
Devayam loka shishtushchayavyam Viratma Bhisma Viviyukta Satiharatantam Mastat Pratihat Avede Tate vayam loka shishtushchayadya Viratma Bhisma Viviyukta Satiharatantam Mastat Pratihat
Ladies, Tat, therefore, te, your, vayam, all of us, loka, world, shashrikshaya, for the sake of creation. Adya, original person. Tvaya, by you. Anushishta, being created one after another. Tribihi, by the three modes of nature. Atma bihi, by one's own. Sma, in the past. Sarve, all. Vyukta, separated. Swaviharatantram, the network of activities for one's own pleasure. Na, not. Shaknunma, could do it. Tat, that. Pratihartave, to award. Te, unto your. Translation, oh, original person, we are therefore but yours only, although we are your creatures, we are born one after another under the influence of the three modes of nature, and for this reason, we are separated in action. Therefore, after the creation, we could not act concertedly for your transcendental pleasure. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The cosmic creation is working under the influence of the three modes of the external potency of the Lord. Different creatures are also under the same influence, and therefore they cannot act concertedly in satisfying the Lord. Because of this diverse activity, there cannot be any harmony in the material world. The best policy, therefore, is to act for the sake of the Lord that will bring about the desired harmony. So a little bit about the context. The context is, this is Maitreya speaking. The person who has asked Maitreya some questions is Vidura. And the series of events preceding this chapter 5 is Krishna has instructed Uddhava for the second time. Uddhava Gita is the first time, it's in Dwarka, and then the second time comes later, where Uddhava doubles back after being sent to Narayana Rishi in Badrikashram, and he can't bear the separation, so he doubles back and he finds Krishna underneath a banyan tree, and lo and behold, Maitreya just happens to come along and hear their discussion. So the Uddhava Gita is not that discussion, it's another discussion, which Maitreya hears. And after Krishna finishes or completes his discussion with Uddhava, he again sends Uddhava to Badrikashram. And as he's heading for Badrikashram, lo and behold, Vidura comes across Uddhava in the forest in Vrindavan, of all places. Nice place to meet. I don't know how he found him in the forest in Vrindavan, but he found him. And, oh, Uddhava, how nice to see you. How's everybody in Dwarka? Because he connects Uddhava with Krishna in Dwarka, because so much time was spent Krishna in Dwarka, and Uddhava was his constant companion. Although Vidura knew, because he had already been to Prabhas, he knew that the Yadu dynasty annihilated themselves. He knew, but he asked anyways, because he didn't want to say, oh, I have some bad news for you. They're all gone. So he didn't do that. How's Balaram? How's Krishna? How's Balaram? How's this one, that one, the other one? And he wants to hear about Krishna. And so there's 1.5, almost 2 chapters where Uddhava goes into trance, Krishna Samadhi trance. He loses external consciousness, absorbed in thought of Krishna. Because he's so deeply attached to Krishna, he's feeling separation from Krishna. And at the same time, Uddhava respects Vidura as his elder, although spiritually he's superior. He respects Uddhava as his elder and struggles to come to external consciousness and speaks about Krishna in very mysterious ways. Different but similar to Kunti. I don't understand. He does this and he does that, he does the other thing. Then he goes through Krishna in Vrindavan, Krishna outside of Vrindavan. It's just one verse after the next, absorbed in Krishna meditation. Then, hearing all this, Uddhava's wonderful absorption in Krishna, Vidura wants to ask him some questions, further questions, besides like, how is Krishna and Balaram? So he presents some additional questions, and Uddhava says 2 things. Not far from here is Maitreya, and it would be inappropriate, a junior, to speak teachings when there's a superior available. So you go to Maitreya, he went that way. Because, Vidura, just before Krishna departed, he said that very soon Vidura will come. And Maitreya, I would like you to speak and give him instruction. So it was Krishna. So Uddhava's thinking, wow, just before Krishna left this pastimes, he thought of me. He feels like honored, not like proud, but honored. And so he went to find Maitreya, and he went and found Maitreya. And Maitreya is a very special person. He's not on the same level as Uddhava. At the same time, he's a very elevated person, and he's heard Krishna speaking to Uddhava. So he's in a very special category and worthy to hear from. So of all things, there's some greeting and some exchange. And Vidura asks, please describe creation. Now, if you're going to meet Maitreya off in the middle of nowhere, you're going to ask Maitreya, can you describe creation to me? And it's not like Vidura doesn't know. He learned it as well. He's Vidura. But he wants to hear something that he already knows. Us may know some things, and then to hear from the authority is better than that we know some things. So that's what's going on here in this section. Maitreya is describing, as in other places in the scripture, the process of creation is being described. And the stage of the creation, because there's many things, Mahavishnu and Mahavishnu's compassion upon the living entities that are within his body during the cosmic annihilation period, and he wants them to be happy, but they're just in this deep sleep state. So things happen. The glance, those of you who were attending the class yesterday evening, the glance of Mahavishnu, he glances over Pradhan or Maya Devi, and Shambhu carries the, all this is described in the Bhagavatam also. Shambhu carries the glance, or Shambhu is the glands that carries the jivas and time energy. That's all the work of Rama Devi. She does all this. And then comes the glance, Shambhu, contacting Pradhan. So this is review of where to get to where we are, because it's important to understand what's going on. Who the persons speaking are the primordial demigods before there's even a creation. I'll say it again. These are primordial demigods before there's even anything to rule over. So when Shambhu contacts Pradhan, something happens. His contact plus the jivas with their dormant karma accompanying the jivas. I found this in some commentary that says when the living entities enter the body of Mahavishnu during cosmic annihilation, their covering of the subtle body is still there. That is, clinging to the living entities is the vasanas, the impressions within the mind of their previous activities, so that when the living entities contact Pradhan and they get whammied with false ego, because that's the first element that separates all these different elements. And then the Supreme Lord manifests the demigods to put order to the elements so creation can take place. Before there's even a creation, there's the personalities that help the Lord make the creation happen. And that's the third time I'm saying the same thing. So those are the persons who are speaking these verses. They're speaking this verse as well. And these primordial demigods, before there's even a universe to rule over, are describing to the Lord their ability to cooperate. You don't sound like a Hare Krishna temple sometimes. Their inability to cooperate. No comment, right? It's different. It's similar, but it's different. And so the word that's being used in the translation, after the creation is not, there's not a universe yet, but there's the living entities, there's the 24 elements, including time, and now there's primordial demigods. So after the creation, we could not act concertedly for your transcendental pleasure. This is almost the end of chapter 5, flipping over to the beginning of chapter 6. The phrase that's used is non-combination. So the elements are there, the demigods are there, and it's not combining. Why is it not combining? Because they can't cooperate. Why they can't cooperate? They need the direction of the Supreme Lord. So he has to enter. He does. He makes it possible for them to cooperate. Hint. It doesn't have to be a temple. It can be a non-temple. It's some place where there's devotees that start to come together and find out after some time they can't cooperate. It has to do with our dear friend, false ego. Funny thing, false ego. Separate interest, huh? Here's Bhakti Siddhanta. There's no love in this material world. Wait a minute. I love my dog, I love my children, I love my house, I love my money, I love my country, I love my fill in the blank. How can you say there's no love? So his point, the phrase that's not always repeated, is because there's separate interest. Because there's separate interest. What's the separate interest? Other than the Supreme Lord, or a mix, the Supreme Lord plus my interest. Because my interest is important, right? Because I'm important. I'm not unimportant, I'm important. I'm part and parcel of Krishna. That means I'm important. And so I have my interest. And over there's somebody else that has their interest to please Krishna, right? This is the best way to please Krishna. That's the best way to please Krishna. That's the best way to... And then if there's groups that say, this is the best way, and that's the best way, and they start disagreeing, lack of common interest. The principle is what Prabhupada calls it, unity in diversity. And when the interest of Krishna is at the center, then the differences can easily be worked out. See it differently. If the interest of Krishna is not at the center, the differences prevail. So this is the stage of creation where the differences prevail. They're not like arguing with each other. They're just not cooperating with each other. The universe it's stalled. Like a car stops and they can't start it. You have to bring the mechanic or somebody to get it started again. So the process of creation has come to a standstill. Why? Because they have separate interests, or in the language here, we could not act concertedly for your transcendental pleasure. It's important, isn't it? It's important. It's very important. In the process of creation and in the process of executing devotional service in our lives, of course, we can go live in a mountain somewhere and, not have anybody to interact with. And that way you can be fully cooperative with yourself. But when you have more than one person, whether it's a family or a community or whatever, groups of persons, which is essential, sadhu sangha is essential. And who's a sadhu? Devotee. An elevated devotee? A devotee. Supposing you're not so elevated. Devotee, sadhu. Because they're pursuing the pleasure of Krishna. Maybe not at the mature stage yet, but it's also sadhu. And there's levels of sadhus, in other words, but that they're to be respected. And then we have the wonderful opportunity to learn how to work concertedly for Krishna's pleasure. We need his intervention. So that's what they're doing. As the chapter winds up, they appeal to the Lord, please enter the scene and help us work concertedly. In the Brahma Samhita, Bhaktisiddhanta has his own way of using the English language. He calls it non-conglomeration. The elements are there, the demigods are there. The elements aren't doing what they're supposed to do. The demigods aren't doing what they're supposed to do. There's an unwillingness. It's just not happening. They're not abhaktas, they're bhaktas. But they're the intervention, the connection, and they want it. And so he comes. And then they can do their service. Concertedly, using the phrase here in the purport. So we can point fingers at the modes of material nature and say it's their fault. We could point to the karma of the other person, or maybe ourselves, or combination, and say that's the fault. But those influences, guna and karma, are acting for a reason. What's the reason? The living entity desiring enjoyment separate from the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Including the demigods. Supposing the demigods got it, interest of the Supreme Lord, they wouldn't take position of demigods. They'd be in Vaikuntha. So they got a problem too. And we're small people. So we have this same problem in a bigger scale, or a different scale at least. Same. So this is the teaching about the essence is the process of creation, and within the process of creation, there's lots of lessons. You have to be hearing with attention to understand the practical lessons, but they're there. You know, as above, so below, and then is in between, so below. So the chapter is almost over. I think the next two purports, or next three purports are quite lengthy, and that ends the chapter. So I think I'll end, and we'll continue tomorrow morning. So hear the voice of the demigods who are not working concertedly with one another to do their service. And what do they do to get to the stage where they can work concertedly in their service together? It's a nice lesson. Let's see if there's some discussion. Different class, huh? Different practical also.
Guraj, it's one thing to maintain silence, to not bring out bad news.
Bad news?
Yeah.
Bad news.
And in Vidura's case, you said that, he knows what has happened, and he's asking these questions of Maitreya as if in the present tense, inquiring.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, how is that consistent with the principle of satya, or truthful speech?
It's consistent on the basis that there's another principle that is to be evaluated along with the truthful principle. And that other principle is, it's unwise, it's ill-advised to be the bearer of bad news. He doesn't want to break the heart. He knows, at least he knows of Vidura, and he knows the intensity of Vidura's love, so he doesn't want to bring the bad news. Arjuna does a similar thing. When Arjuna comes back after he knew that the outer dynasty has disappeared and Krishna has disappeared, he looks a wreck when he comes back, and Yudhishthira understands just by seeing his countenance, something really bad. So he draws it out of him. But that's a little different. So, the principle of satyam has its application depending on time, place, circumstance. And one of the considerations, we're not so refined and cultured and experts and wise, but Vidura is. And he's unwilling to bring the bad news. And let's go the other direction. Some people, it's called gossip. Some people they just relish. Hey, did you hear the bad news? Blah, blah, blah. I'm only speaking the truth, Prabhu. It's the truth. Blah, blah, blah. That's not a cultured person. So, back to your question. How is this consistent with the principle of satyam? It's guided by intelligence. And in a relationship, one has to be thoughtful about how some news is going to impact. Now let's just, supposing it's a hospital and the doctor has to inform the family members of what's going on inside the hospital room. They can't not say. That's a different circumstance. There isn't really a choice. It's their professional obligation to bring the bad news. It may be good news, but it could be also bad news. And their responsibility is, just inform them what the truth is. They may try to soften the truth, something. So it's a cultural point. Sometimes the balance of satyam is not just, I got to speak the truth, blah. There's other factors. Could you take the microphone? Because there's people remote.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. When the material elements are undifferentiated, do we still have the three modes?
Dormant, not active. They become stimulated by the time energy. And then they manifest particular ways according to the disposition of the jivas. But they're there. Prakriti has three modes. That's it?
Yes, Maharaj.
Okay. Anyone else?
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, a comment and then a question. One pattern that I see from yesterday's class and today is there is Krishna's influence at every step of the way in creation.
Yes.
And I was thinking, as a mom raising young children, I've seen that, at every step of the way, I have to give them instruction. Like step 1, I may take a break and then come back step 2. And it just seems that way. Even in that realm, there's quote unquote parenting happening. I don't know, that analogy came to my mind.
Yes, sarva karana karanam. It may be remote, it may be not visible, but in every step. No, those that have knowledge of scripture get some of the details. And the details, as we heard last night, can be mind-boggling, gosh. But at every step. And he has different energies and expansions and agents at every step. But they're moving by his volition, his icha. It's all happening. And so there's details and details. So yes, there's parenting from Krishna's side in the whole process of creation, right until cosmic annihilation. And, even at this very moment, although we may not see it.
Yeah, I was also noticing that it's an act of compassion. Your Sunday feast lecture where you talked about Queen Kunti and all the reasons why Krishna might have appeared. And we see even in his creation, it's his act of compassion. That's how I'm taking it.
And according to the modes of nature, that compassion is experienced by one, sometimes this way, sometimes that way, but it's always compassion. When Krishna chops people, it's compassion. When Krishna remains silent or has someone remain silent, it's compassion. And when Krishna speaks strongly, it's compassion. It's his nature. Some people don't get it. Some people don't get it because they don't want to get it. Without going into it, some misfortune comes. Why? Krishna's kindness. Really? Go ahead, your question.
Question is, so these primordial demigods, are they jivas? And so, because
Yes. Now, the topic of Lord Shiva gets a little complicated. Yeah, primarily, yes. The Shiva that comes from the brow of Mahavishnu is Vishnu Tattva. The others are Jiva Tattva. Yes. So, yes.
Okay. So this happens even, the sentence was that when Shambhu contacts Pradhan, at that point in time, the time and the jivas are still in their dormant state?
The jivas are in their susupti state. Yes, time is not in the dormant state, but time that contacts Pradhan is different than eternal time. It's time as we know it, past, present, future, which isn't eternal. It's a transformation. It's Rama Devi does her thing. She's the agent of the will of Mahavishnu, which is creation. And so for creation, it has to be past, present, future. Otherwise, you don't have creation. So it's past, present, or future time. And living entities with their dormant karma. But the dormant karma becomes activated through the contact with the agent of past, present, or future time. And then karma that was dormant becomes awake. It's like, waking up from deep sleep. Like that. So the consciousness of the living entities rise. The modes of nature also rise. Their karma and their inclination towards modes of nature arise. And that Shambhu is no longer Vishnu Tattva. That Shambhu is now in another category. He's still Shambhu, but he's milk but not milk. Before, he's Vishnu Tattva. So he's very mysterious, but he's a servant. Those that didn't attend class last night, they're maybe wondering, what's he talking about? But you can listen to the class from last night so you can catch up on what we're talking about. Anything else? Anyone else? Okay, but let's do in the room first.
Maharaj, I have a question from a previous class.
Okay.
You were speaking about the difference between mental speculation and devotional service. There's a discussion on the relationship, and in devotional service also we read many books. So the question was,
your question today's.
So my question is, at what point do we read, and Rupa Goswami mentions this, that reading too many books is not advised. At what point is reading too many books become mental speculation? And also, just a second part of that is, we probably also have like devotional service mixed with mental speculation. So
Yes.
if you have any comment on it.
So it's not how many books you read, and you got, each of us have a little barometer, and it starts to make a noise if you're going beyond too many books level. It's not the volume or quantity, it's the spirit of reading. Meaning, mixed with Gyan, trying to understand Krishna or the absolute truth by reading many books. That's my understanding of that statement. Better, on the other hand, to become well-versed in fundamental teachings before one goes on to further teachings. Further teachings are important. Further teachings should be carefully approached when there's a fundamental grasp of the basic teachings. In other words, Bhakti Shastri, please, before Bhakti Vaibhav, and Bhakti Vaibhav, please, before Bhakti Vedanta. So one should become learned in the scripture, which means reading books, but moving progressively on the mood of bhakti as opposed to the mood of gyan is where the line goes, reading too many books. That's my understanding anyway. Someone else in the room? Because otherwise we're going to go online. You have something else. She has something else.
Just wanted to offer an appreciation, Gumaraj. This was such a short purport and such a short class too, but that doesn't diminish the power of the Bhagavatam and how powerfully packed it was with refined, subtle cultural points. And I just wanted to share a couple. You mentioned that Vidura feels honored, but not proud. That's just, the refinement of character that it takes to experience something like that.
Well, he has love for Krishna. And his heart was touched because of the affection that Krishna had for him. Just before Krishna departed this world, he thought of Vidura. I mean, he's predicting an event that's going to happen, so why not? But it just, the cord that was plucked by Krishna was the affection Vidura has for Krishna, the affection that Krishna has for Vidura. It's just, a loving exchange that moved his heart. Not without pride, just affection. Okay, online?
This is from Sri Vallabh Prabhu. What do we do in a conflicting situation where you can see in plain sight?
Well, you can see what?
In plain sight.
In plain sight.
That the other person's viewpoint is not going to work, even after repeated failed attempts. Do we pray to Krishna and step aside?
That's a nice option. But that's not the only one.
Or do we pray to Krishna and still cooperate?
I mean, you make step back. When something like that happens, you go into reflective space, mode of goodness space. In the reflective space, not to say you don't do that, but just responding to the question. Go into reflective space and start asking, introspect, look at yourself, and to what degree do I have purity to be interacting with this situation in such a way it's going to improve. So your first business is the introspection, reflection, introspection, seeking purity. And you practice at that, it just becomes second nature. That's what you do. Whenever there's interchange and something seems to be going off course. And in that reflective space, then you have freedom. What that means is, another way of saying that is, your intelligence becomes expanded. In the mode of goodness, you have more intelligence than in passion or in ignorance. Not to say this is not judging you, it's just describing what to do. And when you go into the mode of goodness space, or you're reflecting in the mood of service to Krishna, what's going to be most pleasing to Krishna? Do I have the capacity of purity to affect such a positive outcome, whatever that is? And then you have some choices. You do a little brainstorming, maybe within yourself or with others. What's the best? And if you brainstorm with others, you might find that your perception is incomplete. And by the perception of others, your perception might become more complete about what's going on and what to do. And specifically, what will be most pleasing to Krishna. Because one of the things that's most pleasing to Krishna is that devotees cooperate. To cooperate means I have a mood of respect towards another devotee. My perception at this moment is their idea isn't going to work. But my perception might be adjusted. I shouldn't be looking for validation about my perception. Just what's the best way to please Krishna in this circumstance? And paramount in coming to the stage of cooperation, because that's what's on this, what's the phrase that Prabhupada uses? Concertedly, work concertedly, is Krishna's influence upon you and the other person and the exchange and the situation, etc. You want to invoke Krishna's giving empowerment so that we can work concertedly. And you may not have the answer, and so in that case you may pause. Or wait until there's more clarity, etc., 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 etc. So I'm responding to your question by describing procedure more than a conclusion of that procedure. And in some cases, speak up. In some cases, preserve the relationship, because for cooperation to take place, relationships are everything. Supposing they're right and you're wrong, supposing you're right and they're wrong, if the relationship is strained, how are you going to get concerted efforts? So the relationship is important, and achieving that which is going to be pleasing to Krishna is most important. And so then you have to consider what are the various options. And as best you can, make a wise selection and take responsibility for your choices, because you made the choice, not somebody else made it for you. And the goal remains at the center, that's Krishna is to be pleased. Something else online?
One more question.
Okay.
This is from Radha Kunja Bihari Prabhu. Was Maitreya Rishi an impersonalist who
Speak slower. Maitreya what?
Was Maitreya Rishi an impersonalist who becomes a personalist?
Not exactly. He had inclinations. It's cloudy. It's like the sky the last few days. It's not clear. Because sometimes there's statements that Prabhupada makes that indicate, he's a Mahabhagavata. And at the same time, he had some inclinations that weren't fully devotional, and therefore he's sometimes characterized, not exactly as an impersonalist, but, not a pure devotee at least. And by his association with Uddhava and Krishna, he became very exalted. So there was a transformation, but the question is, what was he before that transformation? And it's not that, my understanding at least, is not that he was a Mayavadi or an impersonalist. He wasn't a most exalted devotee. He had interest in knowledge, and with interest in knowledge, where devotion isn't as prominent as it became later, that there's some leanings in that direction. At least that's my understanding. It's not crystal clear. You want to comment on this? What's your understanding of Maitreya, his leanings?
The only additional thought, comment that I have is, could it be perhaps that Maitreya Muni made further advancement with the association of Vidura, just like Uddhava makes further advancement with the association of the gopis. So he actually progresses further.
By association with Vidura?
Yes.
Or with Uddhava?
Both.
Okay.
Yes.
Nice. Anyone else want to comment on this particular question? His inclinations and leanings? Anything else before we close up? Srila Prabhupada ki